Welcome to Beyond the Music, the podcast where we dive into the lives and stories of people who shaped the world of music. I am Lena.
And I am Karina. We're both classically trained singers, and this podcast is our chance to explore the fascinating intersections of music, history, and humanity.
In our previous episode, we discussed the invention of our music system. And today, we will be exploring the connection between Dmitri Shostakovich and Benjamin Britten. So, at first glance, Dmitri Shostakovich and Benjamin Britten seem like they belong to completely different worlds. Shostakovich lived in the Soviet Union during one of the most dangerous political periods of the 20th century. His career unfolded under Stalin, where art was constantly monitored, judged, and sometimes punished. And if you want to listen more in-depth detail about that, just listen back. I think it's my first solo episode.
Yes. In 1936, after his opera Lady Macbeth of Minsk was condemned by the Soviet newspaper Pravda, his entire career and possibly his life was at risk.
And from that moment on, his music had to function on two levels. One that appeared acceptable to the authorities, and one that communicated something deeper, often darker, more critical, and more personal.
Britten, on the other hand, lived in a completely different system, but he also stood somewhat outside of society. He was a pacifist during World War II, which already made him controversial in Britain, and he was in a long-term relationship with Peter Pears at a time when that wasn't socially accepted.
We have also an episode about him and Peter Pears. Just listen back.
It's a good episode.
Yeah. So while Britten wasn't under the same life-threatening pressure, both composers shared something important. They were, in different ways, outsiders.
Their actual meeting in the 1960s is fascinating because it happens right in the middle of the Cold War. This was a time when East and West were politically divided, and travel between these worlds was highly controlled.
And yet, music created a bridge. Britten traveled to the Soviet Union in 1960, and that's where he met Shostakovich for the first time. And by all accounts, there was an immediate connection. Not necessarily through language, because communication was limited, but through mutual artistic understanding.
And I love that detail. They didn't share a common spoken language fluently, but they did share a musical language, and that was enough.
And this wasn't just a polite professional meeting. They spent time together, attended performances, and developed a genuine respect for each other's work.
What's really interesting is how much they admired each other and how openly they expressed that admiration. Shostakovich saw in Britten a kind of clarity and honesty that he deeply valued.
And Britten, in turn, admired Shostakovich's ability to create powerful, emotionally complex music under extreme political pressure. There's a sense that Britten understood just how difficult Shostakovich's situation was, and respected him even more because of it.
And you can actually hear this connection in their later works. Both composers develop an even more stripped-down, introspective style in their later years, less about grand gestures, more about emotional depth.
One of the most direct expressions of their connection is Shostakovich's 14th Symphony, which he dedicated to Britten.
And this piece is incredibly unusual. It's not a traditional symphony with big orchestral movements. Instead, it's a cycle of songs for soprano, bass, and chamber orchestra, all centered around the theme of death.
The texts come from different poets, and the entire work feels very intimate, almost like a personal reflection rather than a public statement.
And the fact that he dedicated such a deeply personal work to Britten says a lot about their relationship. This wasn't just professional admiration, it was something more profound.
When you compare their music, you start to see clear thematic parallels. Both composers are deeply concerned with the individual versus society, human suffering, and moral conflict.
And especially isolation. Think about Britten's Peter Grimes, a man completely rejected by his community, or Shostakovich's symphonies, where you often feel this sense of tension of something hidden beneath the surface.
And both composers use contrast in very powerful ways. Moments of beauty can suddenly turn into something harsh, almost violent. And that emotional instability feels very real, very human.
Another strong connection is how both composers use the voice. For Britten, the voice is central, especially through his collaboration with Peter Pears.
Yes, Britten writes incredibly specifically for the voice, often using it almost like a narrative instrument. It's not just about singing beautifully, it's about expressing text, character, and psychological depth.
Shostakovich, too, uses the voice in a very direct way, especially in works like the 14th Symphony or his song cycles. The voice becomes a vehicle for truth, sometimes even for protest.
What makes their connections so powerful is the historical context. This was a time when political systems were divided, communication was limited, and suspicion between nations was high.
And yet, music allowed them to connect across those boundaries. Their friendship shows that artistic understanding can exist even when everything else is divided.
So, here are a few interesting details. Shostakovich rarely traveled abroad, so his meetings with Britain were significant and rare.
When Britain visited the Soviet Union, his music was performed there, which was not guaranteed at all, given the strict cultural controls.
And Shostakovich reportedly attended performances of Britain's works with great interest, even when he couldn't fully understand the text.
For me, this connection shows how music can create understanding beyond politics, language, and geography.
And how two very different lives can still lead to a shared artistic truth.
It's not just influence, it's recognition.
And that's what makes this such a powerful connection within music. I hope you enjoyed the connection between Dmitri Shostakovich and Benjamin Britten as much as we did. If you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Next time, we'll delve into another fascinating chapter of music history. Until then, keep listening and discovering the stories beyond the music. See you next time.